Hi, welcome to another video. Today it looks like we got a study guide for some test prep, and we're going to go through all these questions just to kind of give you a better understanding of how I would kind of walk through these questions. So the first one's telling us not to use a calculator. All right, sweet. Select all the true statements. Okay, so 2.3 plus negative 2.3. When you're adding a negative, that's the same thing as subtracting. So we can honestly here just eliminate this and just do 2.3 minus 2.3. Well, that is equal to 0, so I would have agreed with you here. Okay, negative 3.7 plus negative 4.1 is positive. Okay, well, again, anytime you're adding a negative, it's the same thing as subtracting. So now we have negative 3.7 minus 4.1. And the way that I like to do this is I just add these numbers and tack on a negative sign at the end. So 3.7 plus 4.1, that's going to be 7.8. And the fact that it's negative, it's going to be negative. So again, not the right answer, right? It's not positive. Okay, negative 2.6 minus negative 12 over 4. First thing is negative 12 over 4 is the same thing as negative 3. So I'm just going to rewrite this as negative 3. Now, anytime you're subtracting a negative, it's the same thing as adding a positive, right? It's a double negative. It's like the equivalent of somebody saying, do not turn right. In other words, they mean turn right, correct? That double negative implies a positive. So the same thing with math. Negative 2.6 minus negative 3 is the same thing as negative 2.6 plus 3. Again, negative 2.6 is the smaller negative number, so this thing is in fact going to be positive. So this is correct. I agree here as well. 5 halves plus negative 2.5 is negative. Okay? What I would do here in this case is I'd either convert this into a fraction or convert this into a decimal. Now, I think it's easier to convert this into a decimal. 2 goes into 5 2 times with 1 remaining. So 2.5. 1/2 is 0.5. So you have 2.5 plus negative 2.5. Again, drop the adding sign. 2.5 minus 2.5 is negative. That is not true. It's actually equal to 0. So this isn't correct. And then negative 72 minus negative 100. Again, double negative. This turns into a positive. 72 plus 100 is in fact not negative. So I agree with all the questions there. All right. A heron is perched in a tree 50 feet above sea level. Directly below the heron, a pelican is flying 17 feet above sea level. Directly below the birds is a trout swimming 23 feet below sea level. So, in this case, difference always means subtraction. Now, the pelican comes first. So this, in other words, is 17 minus 50. Okay, 17 minus 50. The way that I like to do that is just 50 minus 17 and then make it negative. Okay, you do all your stuff, you borrow, this is a 3, this is a 3, and it's negative 33 feet. Look at that. Correct. Okay, the difference in height between the pelican and the heron is 33 feet. Oh, well, it's the same thing. We just confirmed that's actually negative, so this wouldn't be true. If it said the difference between the heron and the pelican, then it would be true, right? So order matters with subtraction. So that would be correct if it was the other way around. Okay, so the distance between the heights of the pelican and the heron is 33 feet, negative 33 feet. So this one actually would be incorrect. The reason why is because of the difference between the word difference and the word distance. Distance means absolute value. In other words, it doesn't matter about positive and negative. It's just the number, right? So let's say, for example, what's the distance between first and second place in a run, okay? You would say 10 yards. You're not going to say, well, it depends on what position, right? If I am 10 yards behind you, the distance between us is still 10 yards. If I am 10 yards in front of you, well, the distance again between us is still 10 yards. I'm not going to say there's a negative 10-yard difference. It doesn't make sense. No matter what, it's a 10-yard difference. So that is the key distinction here. So this one actually isn't corrected either. So the next one, the difference in heights between the pelican and the trout is negative 40 feet. Okay. So the pelican and the trout. So the difference between 17 and 23. So in other words, this is 17 minus negative 23. which in that case is going to be 40 feet. Perfect. All right, the difference between in height between the pelican and the trout is 40 feet, so I would have chose E here. And the distance between the heights of the pelican and trout is 40 feet. I would also choose F here, right? That is correct. 40 feet here. All right. Let x equal negative 11/8 and y equal negative 11/4. Okay, cool. Which expression has a negative value? Okay, x plus y. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to add these together. So again, negative 11/8 plus negative 11/4. Remember, anytime you're adding negatives like this, it's the same thing as just subtracting. So in this case, notice if I'm negative and I go more negative, it's going to be even more negative. So A does have a negative value. Okay, next one, x minus y. Okay, that's going to be negative 8 minus negative 4. Okay, cool. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to add these together. So negative 11/8 plus, because it's double negative, that's why I'm adding it. 11/4, well, I need a common denominator, which is going to be 8. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by 2, which is going to be 22/8. Look at that. It's actually 11/8. So it's not going to be this one. Now, when I multiply these together, all I'm doing is I'm just multiplying straight across. And now, in this case, obviously, we don't care much about the answer as we care about the signs. A negative times a negative equals a positive, right? So this one also isn't going to have a negative value. And then the same thing, a negative divided by a negative is also a positive. It's not going to equal this as well. Okay, calculate the value of each expression. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write both of these as a fraction. Anytime you write a whole number as a fraction, you just put it over 1 times 2/3. And then I multiply straight across. Negative 8 times 2 is negative 16. And then I'll put that over 3. This one, it's going to be the same thing, but it's a negative times a negative, so it's going to end up equaling a positive. But the answer is still the same. When we're multiplying and dividing, we just do the same thing no matter what. The only thing that changes is the sign itself. Okay, negative 18/3. Well, we can simplify that. 3 goes into 18 6 times, but it's negative, so the answer is going to be negative 6. Okay, 18/3, but it's in parentheses. That doesn't change anything here. It's still going to be negative 6. And then negative 18/3, well, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So in this case, it's just going to be 6. Okay. Solve each of these. Okay, so for this first one here, 1/3 A is equal to negative 5. Well, anytime you're multiplying by a fraction, it's the same thing as dividing. So multiplying by 1/3 is the same thing as dividing by 3. This is A over 3 equals negative 5. Now, inverse operations, right? It's the process of undoing things. So how do I undo dividing by 3? I'm going to multiply both sides times 3. So that's going to give me A equals negative 15. You can always check your work by plugging this back into the equation. Negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5, so that works. Okay. Now what I would do here is I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. That's going to give me negative B is equal to 0.5. Now I have this negative, so how do I get rid of the negative? Well, I can divide or multiply by the negative. It doesn't really matter, but I have to do it on both sides, so it's just going to be a sign flip. B is equal to negative 0.5. Okay, here I have negative 10c. This negative 10 is multiplying by the c, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 10. All right. Negative 0.1 divided by negative 10. So in this case, we're dividing by a 10, which is a base value, which is a decimal move. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do our decimal move. Again, it's base 10, so it's only one decimal move, so it's going to be 0.01 this time. It's making it smaller. And it's going to be positive because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So 0.01 is equal to C. If you wanted to do this mathematically, using long division, what you would do is you would knock the equation over. I always like to say, nobody likes fractions, so we just knock it over. So negative 10 divided by 0.1, negative. Okay, how many times does 10 go into 0.1? It doesn't, so I put down a point. Okay, or the point just comes here naturally. How many times does 10 go into 1? It doesn't, so I put down a 0. Put down a 0 here because it doesn't go in. How many times does 10 go into 10? One time, and then you can see there, all works out. 0.01 is going to be our answer. All right. The table shows transactions from 5 different bank accounts. Cool. So, new account is going to be equal to the old balance plus the transaction amount, right? If I have money and then I spend money, that new balance is the result of me doing those two actions, right? My new account balance, right? How much money I have now is a product of what I did with my old money, if that makes sense, right? So the way that I would solve this is 352, for example, minus 48 equals 304. Okay, so 432 plus or minus some value must equal 512. Well, how do I find out what's happened here? Well, what I can do is I can do subtraction, right? I can find out the difference. So 512 minus 432. Some little math here. Subtract, borrow, bring over, 8, 0. So 80, right? So that answer is going to be 80 here. So old account balance, transaction amount. This one's different. I don't have to find the difference here because I'm not doing the new value and the old value. I'm doing what has happened. So old account balance plus the transaction amount equals new account balance. So 75 plus negative 100. Well, 75 plus negative 100, remember, anytime you're adding a negative, it's the same thing as subtracting. So we're doing 75 minus 100. The way that we do that is I just do 100 minus 75. And then I just tack on a negative. Again, I'm going to just borrow right here. 10. This is going to become 9. 1. 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 7 is 2. It's going to be negative, so negative 25. Okay. So, old account balance, transaction amount of 52. New account balance is 12. So, again, old account plus transaction amount equals new balance. So, some value, let's just say x plus 52, right, equaled 12. Well, inverse operations here. What's the opposite of adding 52? I can subtract 52 here. I can do that on both sides. And look at that. It's going to be a negative number. X is equal to 12 minus 52 is the same thing as 52 minus 12. We just tack on a negative. So that's going to be 40. So in other words, negative 40. Okay, explain what each of the numbers, negative 10, negative 20, and negative 30, tells you about account 5. Well, it tells us that he started with the negative number, right? He overdrafted his account is what you'd probably say, or he just started with negative money. Then he spent money that he didn't have, right? So he owed $10. Then he spent $20 more, even though he already owed $10. So that now means that he owes $30, right? That's essentially what he's doing. He was broke, became broker, now is really broke. All right. So Jada walks up to the tank of water that can hold up to 10 gallons, all right? When it is active, a drain empties water from the tank at a constant rate, okay? So we're dealing with average rate of change. So the distance in our y values over the distance in our x values, okay? When Jada first sees the tank, it contains 7 gallons of water. Okay, important information here. First sees the tank. What is that? That means time equals 0, right? First instant actually, not even second. First instant contains 7 gallons of water, right? So what is that ordered pair? Well, our x value is usually always time, so time equals 0, comma, it contains 7 gallons. All right. 3 minutes later, okay, that's our next one. The tank contains 5 gallons of water. Okay, that's our next one here. Cool. So these are our 2 points. At what rate is the amount of water in the tank changing? Use a signed number and include the unit of measurement in your answer. Okay, so rate of change between 2 points. The distance in my y values over the distance in our x values. Where our y values are here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 7 minus 5 over, and I started with this point on the top, so I have to start with this point on the bottom. So 0 minus 3. Okay, 7 minus 5 is 2. 0 minus 3 is negative 3, so this is negative 2/3. Okay, so now, and include the unit of measure in your answer. Now this is a rate. So what is it? This is per minute, right? Because our unit rate is going to be per minute. And we're dealing with gallons. So this is negative 2/3 gallons per minute. Okay. How many more minutes will it take for the tank to drain completely? Explain or show your reasoning. Okay. So the way that you would do that is you would set up an equation kind of like this. This is a line, right? Y equals mx plus b. Well, our slope is negative 2/3. So negative 2/3 x plus our initial value. Well, that's our 7 value. Okay. Now, how many more minutes will it take for the tank to drain completely? Is the tank's gallons our y value or our x value? Well, let's look at our points. Well, this was 0 minutes. This was 3 minutes. So x is based on time. 7 gallons and 5 gallons. So our y value is our gallons. So I'm going to replace y with 0. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to solve. So opposite of adding is subtracting. So negative 7, negative 7. Okay, so I have negative 7 is equal to negative 2/3 x. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2/3. Dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by that fraction flipped over. So this is the same thing as negative 7 times 3/2 negative, which is going to end up equaling negative 21/2 equals x. Or in other words, or not negative, sorry, because these are both negative, so this is going to be positive. Or in other words, 10 minutes and 30 seconds, because it's going to be 0.5, right? But 0.5 of a minute is 30 seconds, so 30 seconds is going to be our final answer here. Okay, now how many more minutes before Jada arrived was the water tank completely full? Well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use my same exact equation, but instead of having 0 here, I'm going to have 10. 10 is equal to negative 2/3 x plus 7. Again, none of this changes because my initial value is still 7 and it's still decreasing at negative 2/3 x, but my process does not change. I'm going to subtract 7. I got 3 is equal to negative 2/3 x. And then what's going to happen here, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So 3/2 negative is equal to x. And then we got negative 9/2 is equal to x. Now, why is it negative? The reason why it's negative is because it was before, right? So in other words, 4.5 minutes earlier, it was full. That's the reason why this one is negative. So that negative value actually makes sense. And that is everything for today. I hope that helped. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care. Peace out.